Imagination. I am Josh Lamar Morris III, the co-host. My special guest, Michael Pickard, author of Off the Books. I welcome you, Michael Pickard, to my Greatest Imagination podcast.
It's great to be here.
And welcome back. I had him on before. Had some communication problems with the sound. Had to end podcast, so we're doing episode 22 here today to finish up. And the episode is what it takes to write a good novel. First question, Michael, what makes a great storyteller?
Well, I think it starts with someone who has a story in their head and in their heart that they believe needs to be shared. It takes that kind of commitment because to write a novel, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, more than most people would believe.
Right,
It also takes appreciation of the writing craft, language skills, of course. But beyond that, for me, it includes preparation, the willingness to be vulnerable in your writing, and being persistent.
right, right. Tell me and the listener the joy of writing.
Well, for me, writing is a pleasure. Editing, not so much, but it's part of the process. Uh, in order to be able to craft a piece of fiction, where I've invented compelling characters doing interesting stuff, uh, sometimes difficult things, and then sharing that story makes me feel like I'm contributing to society in some small way. My personal goal is to create stories that entertain, inform, and provide an opportunity for the reader to think. Entertainment is the easy part, right? It's a good
Right,
story,
right,
engaging dialogue, descriptions that put the reader where the action is. Informing requires a little more uh, because I want my stories to be able to be audited for accuracy, at least for those parts that I don't invent. Uh, I've written a lot of science fiction, and every science fiction story that I've written has some nuggets of real science in it. The toughest goal is providing an opportunity for the reader to think about what they're reading.
right.
My stories raise issues that deserve attention, and so if I achieve all of these, I feel like I've succeeded.
Cool, cool. Next question. Tell me and listeners your story of becoming a storyteller.
Well, it was a fortunate mistake. Uh, Back in 1993, my daughter was going to overnight camp for the first time. And she said, "Daddy, please write me every day." And I want to be a good father. I want to do what she asked. Didn't sound too hard. But I was worried that I would, if I wrote her just boring letters about what I had for breakfast or what I did at work, uh, she might even rip them up before she opened them. So I decided that I would write her a story. And as a father, I wanted to have a message in the story, right? Because that's what fathers do.
Right,
And this was her first time going to camp. So I decided to write a story about a character who was going to have more difficulty at camp than she ever would. And so I decided that that would be an alien who came from another planet and came to overnight camp. Uh, so instead of sending her Dear Samantha letters, she'd get chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Well, I did that the first year, and she came back from camp, and I said, "How'd you like the story?" And she said, "Oh, I love the story," and I shared it with my cabin mates. And I went, "Whoa! I don't have an audience of one. I have an audience of maybe a dozen." So she asked me to repeat that in years 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so I kept writing add-ons to the story. I was also telling people about it, and they wanted copies. So when I had 5 years worth, I had what I considered critical mass to turn it into a novel. And so the
Ooh,
Gerfnet Chronicles, about an alien who comes to overnight camp and causes havoc, was my first novel.
great. That's very cool. Now tell me and the listeners about your book collection.
Uh, I have 9 novels on the market, uh, plus a collection of uh, short stories and essays, and 2 children's books. Uh, the novels are all science fiction, and they deal with either aliens coming to Earth or Earthlings going to the stars, strange creatures on the planet. Uh, Griffin Chronicles was the first book, and then the second one I wrote was a prequel to that called Originated Under Twin Suns, which tells the story of where Griffin came from, including how he was born. Uh, then I wrote a trilogy. This was my first trilogy, called Invasive Species, where a meteorite lands on Earth and it has a seed in it, and the seed grows to be a plant in the shape of a human. And the plant thinks it's there to learn about Earth, but in fact, the plant has been lied to and is there to prepare for conquest of Earth. So that took 3 books to tell. Uh, Off the Books was one of the novels I wrote based on the question, what if? What if all of the hundreds of thousands of workers in China who are currently putting together things like iPhones, what if they were all replaced by robots? What would China do with hundreds of thousands of idle workers? And so Off the Books describes one possibility for how they might have addressed that. I'm also
Okay.
proud of that one because it was the first book where I was really intense about writing the story of a character who had a very definitive character arc. A young woman who starts out unsure of herself in a new job, uh, and who ends up solving the day and feeling very accomplished. So I really like that novel for what I did. Uh, Cold Shoulder is about humans who go off and colonize other planets and the difficulties they run into. One Photo Too Many is the story of a photographer who has the ability to do mental telepathy with sea creatures, and tries to get the sea creature out of trouble. And my latest novel is a time travel novel, and science fiction authors are almost obligated to write a time travel novel. So mine is called Forward and Back. That was released in February of this year, about a particle physicist who becomes a victim of his own experiment and is thrown 8 years into the future, and how he deals with that, and if he decides to try to come back to his home time.
Ooh,
In the meantime, I'm working on 3 mystery novels at the same time. I'm taking a little break from sci-fi and trying my hand at mystery. Uh, the first book is going to go to beta readers in about a month. I'm doing my final edits. The second one is
great.
completed and is going through a critique process with my critique groups. And the third one will be written in November during National Novel Writing Month, where I get to dump the story out of my head.
Great. Cool. Is anything that you want to add, any value that's on your mind that you want to share right now?
Well,
Floor is yours.
I've realized that being a writer requires thousands of decisions, and it can feel overwhelming. But I recommend that people who write embrace the opportunities of making decisions and to not be afraid. Uh, Sometimes people will hesitate to make a decision because they think they might make the wrong one. Uh, but if you know the characters that you're writing really well, sometimes they'll whisper in your ear with guidance. And they know the story even better than you do if you've done really good character backgrounds. So absolutely pay attention to your characters. They will help guide you through the decision-making process.
Cool. Last question. Where can we find you online?
Well, the book collection that I've mentioned is available at www.gerfnit, G-E-R-F as in Frank, N-I-T.com. That'll take you to my Amazon author page. On Twitter and Instagram, my title is Gerfnit Author, all smushed together. But I really love getting email from either people who've purchased my books or people who are considering purchasing my books. And so they can contact me directly at author@gerfnit.com.
Great. And thank you again, Michael Pickard, for coming on my Greatest Imagination podcast.
Well, thank you very much for having me.